Hello and thanks for joining me. Over the last few weeks, we've been hearing a great deal about vaccination and getting the jab or not getting the jab, and some people are rushing in to get the jab and there's not enough jabs around, and others are hesitant because they've heard of various side effects or people dying or blood clots or a whole lot of things. So before we go into, I thought, presenting this little segment on just some of the nature of how these technologies, these vaccines that we're seeing in Australia and others that are also coming, are actually developed. It might help to dispel some of the fears of the unknown about it. But before I go any further, I just want to stress that any vaccination always has its risks. And while vaccines throughout the history of the world, basically modern vaccinations, is about 1796 when Edward Jenner used cowpox to basically develop it and develop an immunity for smallpox, which then spread around the world. And then you've got Louis Pasteur in 1885 who developed an immune or a vaccine against rabies. And then not till the discovery of bacteriology in the 20th century, when a lot more vaccines in the 30s and in the 50s and so forth were developed. But it's worthwhile knowing that a little bit of background of each of the actual vaccines. But no one can force anyone to take a vaccine. Vaccines are good for us. Vaccines are build up an immune system. They're always trying to develop that, and certainly the history of medicine has shown that. But certainly it's also shown that vaccines come with their own risks. Generally speaking, it takes between 6 to 10 years to fully develop a vaccine. Initially, there are always teething problems, even when tens of thousands of trials have been used and people have been tested. There are still things. So with the new technologies, particularly for COVID-19, the years are simply not there. That long-term data simply isn't there. And I can understand that if someone were to say to me, look, I'd like to have a vaccine, but I'm just not ready yet. I'm a bit fearful. I don't know. So I say to you as a pastor and as a guide of souls and people in their faith that receiving a vaccine is a decision that you must make conscientiously with your GP who knows your medical record, and it's not something that you do because government policy requires it or someone pushes it from the workplace. No one can force you to have or not have a vaccine. That's a decision that you make personally as you exercise your human freedom. Now, to go to the actual 3 different types of vaccines that we're seeing. Firstly, we've got viral vector vaccines, which is the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson. Then you've got the mRNA vaccine, so messenger RNA, which is the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. And then you've got something like Novavax, of which Australia has bought 51 million doses, which hopefully will arrive early next year. And that's a more conventionally based vaccine. Let's look at the viral vector vaccine, which has been around since the 70s, so it's not that new. The viral vector vaccine basically takes a harmless virus, found in chimpanzees, actually, the one they're using, and it's injected or modified so that it resembles and has the tip of the protein of the coronavirus. You remember the coronavirus has that ball, looks like, with all those those thorns coming out of it. Well, it's the protein is the virus itself is adjusted so genetically so that it cannot duplicate and therefore cannot harm the person. The tip is adjusted or attached to it from the actual coronavirus that cannot duplicate, and it acts as a vector because the virus itself goes into the person's body and goes and tries to infect them as normal viruses do, but they're actually harmless because they've been neutralized. But what it does is once it comes to the cell, in contact with the cell recognizes those protein tips that are very similar to the ones for coronavirus, and then starts to develop antibodies. So if it meets the real thing, then it's able to defend the body against it. In the case of the Pfizer or the Moderna technology, which is the mRNA, what they've done is they've actually looked at the coronavirus DNA, the complete structure of it. They've separated it, so one line, it's, as you know, it's got like a train track that's twisted. That's the full DNA, deoxynucleic acid, and they've made it into the mRNA or the RNA, so one strand of it, and they've worked out how to complete the other side by genetically modifying it. So they've actually worked out how to grow the protein spikes. What they've done is then they've got these protein spikes, they've coated them in fat so that it can go actually to the body and last the journey. This is a very, very new technology. It has never been used in a vaccine before, and that goes into the cells. It communicates with the DNA of the cell, but doesn't modify the DNA of the cell, the genetic structure, and it cannot actually harm you because the protein spike itself has been neutralized. And then it teaches the cell how to grow its own protein spikes on the outside of the cell. Then the body recognizes this, and the immune system starts to develop an antibody so that if it comes in contact with the real virus that's capable of duplicating itself, we call it a live virus, as opposed to a dead virus, which means it's a virus that's incapable of duplicating itself. So if it comes into a contact with a live virus, then it's able to defend itself against it. And the third type of vaccine that's being produced, the Novavax, which is in its third phase of the trial, it's a more conventionally based vaccine. And basically they take the protein spikes from a coronavirus, so it's actually a piece of the virus, but it cannot duplicate itself, so it's dead virus, it's called. It's actually inserted into the body, it goes to the cells recognize it as a foreign body, the body's immune system is triggered and starts to build up antibodies against it. And then if it were to meet the real coronavirus, then the body will be equipped to actually defend itself against that virus. Keep in mind, however, that although vaccines, whichever one you may choose or not choose to receive, although they can certainly help a great deal your immune system, there's no guarantee that you cannot get sick. However, you can still get the sickness in a lesser way. Of course, with the newer technologies, there are still unknown factors, even though there's been tens of thousands of cases done with them, but that long-term study hasn't been, or those results haven't been done because there just isn't that experience. So the data is constantly being collected. But there's a great deal of pressure being put to make people take the vaccine. And then people naturally would like to have a choice which vaccine they take or when to take it. And as I said at the very beginning, your freedom is a God-given gift. Nobody can force you to do this or that. So I advise you as a pastor and as a moral guide that this is a choice only you can make together with your doctor who knows your personal medical history and can best advise you regarding your own safety and well-being. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you again next time.